Hello and welcome to tonight's show. We're diving deep into the world of government, specifically the concept of separation of powers. Now, before you change the channel, I promise this is way more interesting than it sounds. Think of it like this. Imagine your government is a delicious cake. You wouldn't want all the frosting on just one slice, right? That's where separation of powers comes in. It's like a recipe that ensures no single part of the government hogs all the power. This principle is all about dividing the responsibilities of governing a country into distinct branches. Each branch gets its own set of powers and limitations. The big three are the legislative branch, the lawmakers, the executive branch, the enforcers, and the judicial branch, the referees. The idea is that by keeping these branches separate, you prevent any one person or group from becoming too powerful. It's like having a really intense game of rock, paper, scissors, but instead of hands, it's the fate of a nation at stake. This principle is enshrined in constitutions and political systems worldwide. But how does it actually play out in the real world? Well, strap in, folks, because we're about to take a hilarious yet informative trip around the globe to find out. First stop, the good old US of A. The Founding Fathers, after throwing off the shackles of British rule, were pretty keen on this whole separation of powers thing. They even wrote a whole constitution about it. They created a system with distinct branches, each with its own turf. You've got Congress making the laws, the President executing them, and the Supreme Court interpreting them. It's like a three-ring circus, but instead of clowns juggling, it's politicians wielding power. But here's the kicker. They also built in a system of checks and balances. This means each branch has ways to keep the others in check, preventing anyone from getting too big for its britches. For example, Congress can impeach and remove the president. We all remember how that went, right? The president can veto laws passed by Congress, and the Supreme Court can declare laws unconstitutional. It's a delicate dance, folks. But it's kept the American experiment going for over 2 centuries. One of the most famous examples of this system in action is the landmark case of Marbury vs. Madison. Back in 1803, the Supreme Court basically said, hold on, we get to decide what's constitutional and what's not. This established the principle of judicial review, a cornerstone of the American system. Next up, let's hop across the pond to the United Kingdom. Now, unlike the US, the UK doesn't have a single written constitution. Instead, their system is a glorious hodgepodge of tradition, laws, and conventions. Think of it like a centuries-old fruitcake full of surprising bits and bobs that you're not quite sure how they got there. In this system, the lines between the executive and legislative branches are a bit blurrier. The Prime Minister and their cabinet are actually members of Parliament. That's right, the folks running the country are also the ones making the laws. It's enough to make an American founding father spin in their grave. But before you start thinking this is some kind of undemocratic free-for-all, the UK has its own ways of keeping things in check. The judiciary, while not as powerful as its American counterpart, still plays a vital role in upholding the rule of law. And let's not forget the power of public opinion. British citizens have a knack for making their voices heard, whether it's through protests, petitions, or strongly worded letters to the Times. Now let's jet over to India, the world's largest democracy. India adopted its constitution in 1950, drawing inspiration from both the US and the UK systems. The result is a unique hybrid that reflects India's own historical and cultural context. One of the most striking features of the Indian system is the prominent role of the judiciary. India's Supreme Court is considered one of the most powerful in the world, with a wide-ranging mandate to protect the Constitution and fundamental rights. This has led to what some call judicial activism, where the court has intervened in numerous policy areas, from environmental protection to LGBTQ+ rights. A landmark case in this regard is the Kesavananda Bharati case of 1973. In this case, the Supreme Court ruled that while Parliament has the power to amend the Constitution, it cannot alter its basic structure. This decision essentially established limits on parliamentary supremacy and solidified the judiciary's role as the ultimate guardian of the Indian Constitution. Section 5. France's semi-presidential system, a balancing act. Our final destination is France, the land of cheese, wine and, well, a rather interesting take on separation of powers. France operates under what's known as a semi-presidential system. This means they have both a president, who's head of state, and a prime minister, who's head of government. The president, elected directly by the people, wields considerable power, especially in foreign policy. The prime minister, on the other hand, is appointed by the president, but must have the support of the National Assembly, the lower house of Parliament. This can lead to a fascinating cohabitation where the President and Prime Minister are from different political parties. Imagine the dinner conversations. Adding another layer to this already complex cake is the Constitutional Council. This body is tasked with ensuring that laws passed by Parliament comply with the French Constitution. It's like a referee blowing the whistle on any legislative shenanigans. Section 6. Overlapping functions, a recipe for confusion. All right, folks, we've seen how different countries have tackled this whole separation of powers thing, but let's be real, it's not always smooth sailing. One of the biggest challenges is dealing with overlapping functions. When different branches have their fingers in the same pie, things can get messy. Take, for example, the issue of national security. In many countries, the executive branch has broad powers to gather intelligence and conduct surveillance. But what happens when these activities infringe on the privacy rights of citizens? Who gets to decide where the line is drawn? It's a tricky balancing act, and there are no easy answers. Section 7. Judicial activism when judges make the law. Another challenge is the issue of judicial activism. Now, don't get me wrong. An independent judiciary is crucial for any democracy, but when judges start interpreting the law in ways that seem to go beyond their mandate, it can raise eyebrows. Critics argue that judicial activism undermines democracy by allowing unelected judges to make policy decisions that should be left to elected officials. Others counter that it's necessary to protect minority rights and prevent the tyranny of the majority. It's a debate that's raged for centuries and shows no signs of abating anytime soon. Section 8. Executive overreach, the dangers of too much power. And then there's the perennial problem of executive overreach. Throughout history, we've seen countless examples of leaders trying to consolidate power and erode the checks and balances that keep them in check. From declaring states of emergency to issuing executive orders, there are many ways for executives to overstep their bounds. This is particularly dangerous in times of crisis, when the temptation to centralize power can be overwhelming. It's in these moments that vigilance and a commitment to the rule of law are more important than ever. Section 9. Conclusion, the delicate dance of power. So there you have it, folks, the separation of powers. A simple idea in theory, but a messy, complicated and often hilarious affair in practice. It's a delicate dance of power, with each branch jostling for position while trying not to step on the other's toes. But here's the thing. As frustrating and imperfect as it can be, this system of checks and balances is essential for safeguarding democracy and the rule of law. When power is distributed and no one branch has all the answers, it forces compromise, dialogue and accountability. And that, my friends, is something worth fighting for. So the next time you hear someone complaining about government gridlock or judicial overreach, remind them that it's all part of the grand, messy experiment that is democracy. And who knows, maybe with a little bit of luck and a whole lot of vigilance, we can keep this whole separation of powers thing going for another few centuries. That's it for tonight's show. See you next week, and remember, always read the fine print, especially when it comes to constitutions.